The sky above the cratered city glowed a bruised orange, streaked with the dark trails of smoke and energy discharges that cut across the horizon like scratches on a metal plate. Captain Elias Vorn crouched behind a collapsed transport drone, muttering to himself about how it was impossible for anything in this war to make sense, especially when someone kept leaving half-eaten protein rations in the middle of the battlefield like some cosmic practical joke. His boots crunched over the glassy shards of a shattered walkway, and every footstep echoed like a taunt, reminding him that even after 15 years of fighting, the universe had a way of mocking him. He had barely begun to imagine another day surviving without a laser burn to the face when a flicker of movement caught his eye. There, balanced on the jagged edge of a half-ruined skyscraper, was a figure that looked almost human, except for the impossibly long ears that twitched with every minor sound. Elias froze, squinting through the dust-streaked wind. The figure's eyes shimmered green in the dying light, and her cloak trailed behind her like a living shadow, snagging on the debris with a persistent squeak that somehow made the whole scene absurd instead of threatening. Elias' first instinct was to raise his weapon, but his mind, ever sarcastic, whispered, "Either it's a trap, or the universe is really bored today." The figure tipped her head, one ear folding over dramatically, and Elias thought he saw the corners of her mouth twitch in something like amusement. That was the moment he realized she wasn't a hologram, wasn't a projection, and definitely wasn't a trap designed by his superiors to make him question his sanity. "You," she said, her voice sharp and melodious, "stop gawking like you've never seen someone trip over their own ears before." "I don't usually," Elias said, lowering his weapon slightly, "but when I do, it's usually in a war zone." Her laugh was brief and musical, bouncing off the crumbling walls. She jumped down to the street with a grace that made Elias flinch, partly because she landed lightly on feet that should have made a noise, and partly because her ears twitched again, sending a faint electric pulse through the air that made his communicator buzz with static. "What are you doing here?" he asked, gesturing vaguely at the ruined cityscape. "Evading patrols," she replied, "which is a fancy way of saying I got lost and tripped over my own dignity." Her ears twitched in mock shame. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Some human who likes crouching behind broken machinery." "Captain Elias Vorn," he said, standing taller, trying to look intimidating despite the ridiculousness of his own armor smeared with soot and oil. "And apparently a guy who's about to be involved in something far more complicated than crouching." Her eyes narrowed, but the corners of her mouth curved into that same playful smirk. "Complicated is my specialty," she said, hopping onto a toppled transport drone. "Name's Lysara, and if you're smart, you'll follow me." Before Elias could respond, a sudden whirring sound filled the air. He looked up to see a patrol drone spiraling down, lasers cutting streaks across the walls. The drone didn't pause to negotiate or ask nicely, it was built for one purpose: termination. Lysara pointed at a pile of rubble, and Elias rolled behind it just in time as a blast turned the corner of the building into a cloud of dust and sparks. He peeked out and saw her standing casually, one hand on her hip, a faintly glowing device in the other that seemed to hum in sync with her twitching ears. "Try not to get yourself vaporized," she called, grinning. "It makes my job boring when I have to rescue someone who doesn't appreciate irony." "Noted," Elias muttered, popping up to fire his plasma rifle, the shots sparking off the drone's reinforced hull ineffectively. "You know, most people don't treat saving them from death like a casual favor." "Most people aren't as interesting as you," she said lightly, tossing a small orb that burst into a blinding flash and disoriented the drone. It tumbled sideways, crashing into a rusted vehicle with a cartoonish clang. Elias blinked, realizing that somehow her playful antics had just saved his life. They moved together through the ruined streets, darting past energy barriers, broken hovercars, and the occasional bewildered patrol unit. Every now and then, Lysara's ears would catch some sound, a metallic scrape or the distant hum of reinforcements, and she'd quip about it in ways that made Elias snort despite the danger. At one point, they paused atop a collapsed overpass, panting and brushing soot from their uniforms. "You're lucky," Lysara said, tugging at a flap of her cloak that had caught a shard of metal. "Most humans would have gotten themselves fried, electrocuted, or eaten by a security mech by now." "Lucky or just annoyingly stubborn," Elias replied, "and apparently hilarious if the universe wants to toy with me." They shared a brief laugh before the air shifted with the familiar hum of authority, an approaching convoy of hybrid human-alien enforcers. Elias cursed under his breath. Great, just when I thought this day couldn't get worse. Worse is subjective, Lysera said, ears twitching as if mocking him. I call this Wednesday, you'll see. The enforcers spotted them almost immediately, their weapons glowing with an eerie, pulsing light. There was no negotiation, no pause. One of the alien officers raised an elongated hand in what might have been a formal greeting or a gesture for immediate arrest. It was hard to tell through the red haze of the setting sun. Elias exchanged a glance with Lysera, who shrugged and gave him a mock salute. Well, she said, voice light, I suppose introductions are over, ready for your first interspecies tribunal. Before he could answer, energy shackles shot out from hovering drones, snaring them both. They struggled briefly, their banter continuing in the midst of their capture. You know, Elias said, gritting his teeth, this is not exactly how I pictured meeting an alien noblewoman. Lysera snorted, adjusting her ears so they didn't get caught in the restraints. And you are so much funnier when you're about to die, she said. Maybe we'll get along after all. As they were lifted into the transport vehicle, Elias couldn't help but notice that despite the absurdity of the situation, he felt a spark of something dangerous and unexpected. Curiosity, companionship, maybe even the faintest flicker of hope. And Lysera, despite the grim reality of their capture, seemed just as unshakable, her ears twitching in anticipation, her smirk defying both the enforcers and the universe itself. The vehicle lifted off the ruined city, casting a shadow over the scorched streets, and Elias found himself muttering half to himself, half to Lysera, well, if we survive, I owe you a drink. Or several. Make it a cosmic cocktail, she replied, ears flicking, and maybe some roasted meteorite snacks. We might as well enjoy the absurdity before they execute us. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Elias realized. Survival was going to be terrifying, hilarious, and impossibly complicated, and he wouldn't have it any other way. The transport vessel hummed and vibrated as it cut through the thinning atmosphere, a sleek craft of alloyed silver and crystal that seemed designed more for intimidation than comfort. Elias sat against one of the walls, shackled at the wrists, the cuffs pulsing faintly with a soft blue energy that hummed like a lazy bee. Across from him, Lysera lounged with the casual grace of someone entirely unbothered by being kidnapped, her long ears draping over the edge of the seat, twitching at every vibration. She hummed a tune that was slightly out of key but somehow fitting, as though mocking the universe's insistence on dramatic tension. You know, Elias said, rubbing the back of his neck where a thin layer of soot had settled into his hairline. I have survived ambushes, plasma storms, and a malfunctioning gravity field, but being stuck in a moving metal coffin with you might just take the cake. Metal coffin? Lysera asked, arching an eyebrow. I call it a tour of interstellar justice with complimentary hum of energy shackles. Sounds much more theatrical. She wiggled her toes, which were inexplicably clad in slippers made of some shimmering alien fabric. Besides, I'm trying to make the experience enjoyable. You should thank me. Elias squinted at her. Enjoyable. Yes, she said, flicking a panel with a delicate finger. A small holographic screen flickered to life, projecting an image of their itinerary: tribunal, interrogation, potential execution. I'm an optimist. You see, even death has scheduling issues. They're never on time, which leaves us time for conversation, strategic eye-rolling, and sarcastic commentary. Elias let out a short laugh despite himself. Sarcastic commentary. My specialty. Their laughter echoed lightly through the cabin as the transport vessel glided past the jagged surface of the planet below, fields of metal wreckage and smoldering craters stretching as far as the eye could see. Beyond the reinforced windows, drones darted like angry hornets, patrolling the skies, and distant explosions dotted the horizon like fireworks gone horribly wrong. Lysera's ears twitched in rhythm to the light flickers, giving her an almost comical appearance, and Elias found himself comparing her to a rabbit-shaped warlord, which made him snort with quiet amusement. The hum of the shackles shifted as they neared the orbital station. Elias tested them experimentally, eliciting a small spark and a startled squeak from Lysera. Really? She asked, flicking one ear. You think shocking me with tiny currents will help your case? My ancestors invented plasma fencing. You're cute, though. I'm being considerate, he said, feigning innocence. I mean, if you get fried, who will make wisecracks at my expense? You're so selfless, she said, rolling her eyes, truly inspiring. They passed into the docking bay of the orbital tribunal, a structure that looked more like a crystalline cathedral than a courtroom, the floors and walls made of translucent panels that glimmered as if alive. Elias felt a wave of vertigo as the vessel locked into place, the hull vibrating slightly as magnetic clamps engaged. He looked at Lysara, who remained poised, her green eyes glinting with amusement. Don't look down, she whispered, noting his hesitation. Or look down, makes no difference. Either way, you'll probably trip on your own feet before they can punish you. Elias allowed a small laugh, shaking his head. You have a terrible sense of timing for humor. Terrible timing? You call this terrible timing? She countered, pointing at a hovering guard bot that suddenly beeped in alarm, its scanner light cutting a dramatic red arc across the docking bay. This, my dear human, is an art form, you'll get used to it. They were led down a corridor of shifting light panels, the walls subtly warping and reflecting both human and alien features in odd combinations. Each guard that passed by glanced at them with a mixture of suspicion and barely concealed annoyance, though a few had the decency to look confused by Elia's repeated muttered jokes. One particularly officious alien, its face a mask of rigid symmetry, bent down and hissed something in a language that Elias didn't understand, only for Lysara to respond in perfect mimicry of the alien's tone, mimicking its voice and accent, which earned her a subtle snicker from a passing human officer. Elias' ears twitched in glee, her smirk widening. In their holding chamber, Elias discovered that their cell was a peculiar mixture of confinement and technological whimsy. Gravity fields fluctuated occasionally, causing them to float an inch or two off the ground before settling again. Automated panels delivered nutrition packs that resembled gelatinous cubes of questionable flavor, some of which vibrated unexpectedly. One of the cubes bounced off Elia's shoulder with a faint squeak and lodged itself in the corner. Intergalactic jello, he muttered. I've read about this. Very dangerous, highly annoying. Highly nutritious, though, Lysara countered, catching one and tossing it with precision back at him. Try it, I promise it doesn't explode, most of the time. Their conversation drifted naturally between survival strategies, teasing insults, and small, accidental revelations. Elias learned that Lysara, despite her alien heritage and long ears, had a fierce independent streak and a sense of humor that could rival his own. Lysara learned that Elias, beneath his soldier's exterior, was surprisingly perceptive, capable of quick thinking and adaptability, qualities that, she noted with a smirk, made him the perfect candidate for constant endangerment. Hours passed with the odd interruptions of guards checking in, drones hovering with awkward politeness, and automated announcements that mispronounced names in ways that became increasingly humorous. At one point, a holographic display attempted to explain the tribunal's procedures, only to glitch spectacularly, causing Lysara to imitate the flickering voice, adding dramatic hand gestures, which made Elias laugh so hard he nearly toppled backward into the wall. As evening approached in the orbital station's artificial light cycle, they sat quietly for a while, the absurdity of their situation settling into something warm and human. You know, Elias said, eyes tracing the slow rotation of the city far below, if anyone asked me to describe how I spent my last hours before execution, I would never have said this. Laughing at a rabbit-eared alien while floating slightly above the floor. Lysara tilted her head, ears flicking, green eyes catching the soft glow. Well, if this is the end, I'm glad it's not dull. And besides, she said, adjusting the cuffs with a flick of her wrist, I think we make a rather charming spectacle. Intergalactic law enforcement doesn't get a lot of humor these days. Elias smiled faintly, allowing himself to relax. Charming spectacle, huh? I'll take that over dying grim and silent. See, she said, nudging him lightly with her elbow. Optimism, it's a skill really, we should patent it. As the cycle of light shifted and the hum of machinery enveloped them once more, they settled into a tenuous rhythm, teasing, laughing, exchanging small strategies, and occasionally practicing evasions in zero-gravity microjumps. Despite the looming threat of execution, the pair found a fragile joy in the absurdity, in the camaraderie born from shared danger, and in the subtle warmth of discovering someone willing to match their wit, endurance, and stubbornness. For the first time, Elias considered that survival might not just be about fighting for life. It might also be about holding onto humor, rebellion, and the small sparks of connection that could make even an execution chamber worth facing. And Lysara, ears flicking in quiet amusement, seemed to understand the same thing, their laughter mingling in a soft echo that defied the rigid structures of law, war, and expectation. The orbital station hummed around them, impersonal and indifferent, while the two captives floated in their small corner of controlled chaos, sharing a fragile, human and alien moment of levity before the universe resumed its serious business. The tribunal chamber was a spectacle that could only exist in a galaxy that had a taste for both dramatics and bureaucracy. It was a giant sphere suspended in orbit, the walls made of transparent alloy that reflected both the city below and the stars beyond. Energy grids crisscrossed the floor, glowing faintly blue and red, shifting in hypnotic patterns as if alive. Elias and Lysara were led in, shackled but upright, escorted by a line of hybrid enforcers whose expressions ranged from solemn to overtly confused by the human soldiers' endless quips. "Welcome, captives, to the Interstellar Council of Justice," intoned the central AI, its voice perfectly flat, though it occasionally mispronounced Lysara's name in a way that made her ears twitch with irritation. "Today we determine the fate of Captain Elias Vorn and noble Lysara of the Sulthari Dominion." "Do we get to vote on snacks?" Elias muttered, glancing at the hovering dispenser drones. "Because I'd like to formally object to gelatin cubes as the only offering." Lysara smirked. "You humans are too serious. Relax, or at least try to appear competent while I do all the heavy lifting." The tribunal's members filed in, a mix of humans in rigid uniforms and aliens with elongated limbs and crystalline eyes. The atmosphere was tense, yet Elias found himself whispering jokes to Lysara under his breath. About the AI's awkward voice, the judge's overcomplicated robes, and the absurd number of blinking panels. Lysara responded with subtle sarcasm, turning her ears toward him in mock approval. The tribunal began, reading charges that seemed more theatrical than legal. Fraternization across species lines, incitement to rebellion, and undermining authority through wit and charm. Elias tried to maintain a straight face, but when a holographic projection of one of his alleged crimes showed him tripping over Lysara's ears while trying to dodge a drone, he couldn't help a snort. "Objection." Lysara whispered loudly enough to startle a judge. "That is not a crime, it is a demonstration of reflexes under extreme duress." "Technicality," Elias added, gesturing at the floating evidence orb, "and highly entertaining. Perhaps consider it as performance art." Despite the humor, the tribunal was serious. Energy shackles pulsed, ready to administer punishment on the slightest infraction, and the AI kept a meticulous record of every misstep. Yet within the absurdity, the bond between Elias and Lysara became palpable, a silent defiance that spoke louder than the statutes they were accused of breaking. When the tribunal's deliberation dragged on, Elias leaned close to Lysara and whispered, "Do you ever feel like they're just making this up as they go along?" "Constantly," she said, ears twitching, "and I'm perfectly fine with that. Chaos favors the prepared and the charming." It was then that opportunity arrived in the most improbable form. A glitch in the chamber's energy grid caused a brief fluctuation, just enough for Lysara to whisper a plan. Using the momentary lapse in the grids, she triggered the gravity controls, sending both of them into a low-gravity tumble that startled guards and judges alike. Elias adjusted midair, grabbing Lysara's hand as they bounced between floating platforms, narrowly avoiding laser arrays. "Your move, O noble rabbit," he said, grinning. "Watch and learn, O human klutz," she shot back, flicking a panel that sent a net of energy cables reconfiguring to block the pursuing enforcers. They darted through the tribunal chamber, using the architecture itself as a weapon and a shield, Lysara's ears brushing against sensors and causing mild electrical surges that shorted drones. Elias improvised, using a dislodged floating console as a makeshift shield, ducking and rolling with a soldier's precision while delivering running commentary. "If anyone is keeping score, I'm definitely losing in style points." The chaos escalated, yet humor threaded through every action. A hovering snack drone attempted to deliver its gelatinous payload mid-chase, smacking one of the alien judges squarely in the face. Elias and Lysara exchanged a quick glance and a grin, realizing that even as the universe tried to execute them, it had a warped sense of comedy. They reached the outer docking bay, and Lysara pressed a sequence of buttons that commandeered a nearby starship, a vessel shaped like a shimmering crystal rabbit, wings folding and engines humming with light. I told you, she said, chaos favors the prepared. Elias grabbed the controls alongside her, his hands steady, and together they launched the vessel, evading the pursuing patrols with a combination of quick maneuvers and quips. Next time, Elias panted, I vote for a getaway car that doesn't look like it hopped straight out of a fairy tale. Where's the fun in that? Lysara replied, adjusting a dial that made the ship shimmer in refracted starlight, confusing their pursuers. As the stars stretched into streaks outside the viewport, Elias allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had entered the city a hardened soldier, focused on orders and survival, and now he was something else entirely. Part of a duo that defied law, convention, and expectation, bound not by allegiance to any army but by something infinitely more complex and dangerous: love. Lysara glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. We survived, she said, her voice softening, ears flicking gently in the zero-gravity hum of the vessel. We actually survived. And if anyone tries to execute us again, Elias said, matching her tone, I'll make sure they trip over something ridiculous first, preferably your ears. They laughed, the sound mingling with the hum of the engines and the endless expanse of stars. Beyond them lay a galaxy still fraught with war, rigid laws, and absurd bureaucracies. Yet for the first time, Elias felt untethered from fear. Humor, love, and courage had carried them through, and he knew they would face whatever came next together. Lysara leaned against him, adjusting the ship's course toward the nearest uncharted system, her green eyes reflecting starlight. Do you realize, she said, that the universe will probably tell everyone we're dead just to save face? Good, Elias replied, reaching over to steady her hand. Let them think so, we get to write the rest of the story ourselves.